Welcome, Maxa. We're so happy having you here. We're so excited about this talk. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And I would like to thank to Goethe Institute Rio de Janeiro as well. That is a partner to make this true, make this happen, this event and this talk with you. So thank you so much for being here with us in the Cabíria Festival 2022.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation and for having me.
Okay, so let's start our talk. I'm so excited to get to hear you. Just one little second here. Okay, that's better. Maybe, Maxa, you could introduce the main points of this talk just for a start. I think this is a good start for us.
Yeah, sure. So I've been the artistic director of the International Women's Film Festival in Dortmund and Cologne, so in 2 cities, since 2018. And I'm going to talk about the history a little bit, maybe, in order to give you the key points or the key milestones of this festival. And then, of course, I've got certain key points that I want to talk about, which I can also introduce, and maybe they serve the discussion after this. The festival is relatively old. It's one of the oldest in the world. I think the first women's film festival was founded in 1979 in France by Jackie Buet and other women. It's called the Festival des Films du Cinéma Créteil. That's an area in Paris. And we followed up a couple of years later in the mid-80s. So we are part of the, if you want, second, third feminist wave grassroots movement. So these feminists who had worked through a lot of art and theory in the 70s, but were ready to institutionalize their work in the 80s. So we're part of that. We grew out of simply a group of women who wanted to know more about film and show current work. And that went on really well in both cities, in Dortmund and Cologne, both of which are in West Germany, and they're around an hour from each other. Until 2006, when the festivals were fused by the state for monetary reasons, which wasn't a very good idea, but it happened. So since then, these 2 grassroots festivals became one big festival in 2006. And obviously you can understand that changed a lot. It changed the program, and the festival just became also bigger, So there are lots of questions that still are very urgent, questions that the festival directors have asked themselves before me. But of course, also we found a lot of answers in the last 40 years. There are some festivals that I think we could implement today, and they would just be as current as then. There was a festival in 1993 about the subversion of laughter and comedy, so the critical potential of comedy, which is still very current. But of course, there are other issues that have changed a lot. So the festival it's not a progressive history. History goes in circles. But I think that the 2000s is really a big moment in the festival history, but also in feminist, or the history of emancipation. Some of the listeners might be too young to remember that feminist studies or female filmmaking in the 90s was at a really different point. It was very advanced because it came on the back of the 70s and 80s emancipation movement, women's movement. It was very strong. But then something happened in the 2000s. I think, in my personal opinion and research, it was really the Iraq War that started a media propaganda that wanted women back home while the men fought in a foreign country. That's also when it became very trendy to be heavily pregnant. The whole Kardashian things started to slowly at that point in the early 2000s. And the festival also had a critical moment where apparently everything had been achieved, women had been emancipated, women were in power positions, yet at the same time there was this really regressive turnaround. And when I took over the festival 2018, I could clearly hear the desire to go back to political statements, or to return to some more activist, less institutionalized forms of curating and showing films. So I think, just to say that the festival also had, lived through different chapters. I think 2000 was an important one, 2006 with the fusion, and then recently, after the bank crisis, 2008, and the wars after that, the Me Too debate, it's now become quite active and close to the contemporary discourse again. So that's what I wanted to say. But what interests me here for this talk is, what I call the millennium mums phase. If you ask young women in Germany today, in their mid-20s, how they envision their life, a lot of them would tell you, I would like to be a mom, and once I have children, I would like to be a stay-at-home mom, or maximum have a part-time job. And for those of you who hear this now and say, well, yeah, sure, you better go back to history and see that things were different in the 80s and the 90s. That's a quite regressive opinion. That's the turn of what I think is part of the fundamentalist families, either the Christian right or the Muslim fundamentalist family since the 2000s. But I have to deal with that. So I would like to know what really happened in the early 2000s. What are the different aspects of this break in the history of emancipation, of feminism, and of feminist filmmaking? And more importantly, if we ask ourselves that questions, how do we find access to the information needed for this analysis? Because it's certainly not out there on the internet, and it's also not in dominant discourse. So access to research material, access to data, access to information beyond the quick online search is something that needs to be addressed urgently for today's generation.
Very interesting, Maxa. Can you maybe expand a little bit on this subject that you just started right now?
Sure. I mean, the question I ask myself is why every single generation has to rediscover Alice Guy. Alice Guy was a pioneer of a female pioneer in filmmaking. She made the first narrative films around 1900, and she's not been written into the history books. It starts now, because female feminist researchers have done a great job, but still every generation has to rediscover their Chantal Akerman and their Andrea Arnold and other milestones in cinema history, because they don't get taught these names. They get taught male directors. So the logic of, you've got a generation of women who research this stuff, they accumulate the knowledge. That accumulated knowledge, or what we call episteme, that body of knowledge, is integrated into the mainstream discourse. That mainstream discourse is then transferred to the next generation, who also accumulate their information, and so it grows. That logic doesn't apply to marginalized or off-center epistemes, such as feminist studies. In our case, the way history works is in spirals or circles. So because this knowledge is not being dropped in the center of knowledge, every generation has to rediscover itself. Of course, we are there to help, and other institutions and other generations are there to help, but still, the logic of capitalist accumulation, if you like, of profit and growth, these kind of male patriarchic values, and systems don't apply to feminist film studies, which are more fragile and circular. So yeah, I'm trying to give you an image of how time and history and knowledge works here. So one is linear and accumulative, and one is like a spiral, which has a different tradition anyway in philosophy. Yeah, so I mean, Leontine Sagan, who's a very important Austrian-Hungarian filmmaker. I'm sure not a lot of you have heard her name, or Jane Campion, I hope a bit more. She's now getting her second time round. She was the first woman to receive the Cannes Palme d'Or in '93 for the piano. And then it was like 20 years of male receivers of the Palme d'Or. Margaret von Trotta, very important German director. Naomi Kawase from Japan, or not the American Ava DuVernay. All these names, I'm sure, are not very familiar, and that's because our history, as soon as accumulates, is being pushed to the margins again. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Why women film festivals are really crucial in these days.
It's really great to hear you and this idea that we have to rediscover these names again and again and again and again. And I think it's great that you have this historical introduction. It's really essential for this talk here, for thinking curatorship, feminist curatorship. Of course, it's essential to look back and this is really interesting that you bring this. I think the younger generations probably are gonna learn a lot from this talk, but also who are here for longer are happy to hear what they feel and what they have experienced and what they have observed. And it's really interesting. Thank you. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about the short film selection we have on the festival.
Yeah, sure. Just to add to what you just said, since the audience here will probably be Brazilian, most of them, we did have an extremely great film input from Brazil. Since I became artistic director, and probably also before, but I cannot confirm that. A really amazing work. I'll talk about the films later. This year we opened with Joana Oliveira's film Kevin. It's a documentary film that was released this year or last year, but it opened our festival and was a great success. And I can just say, Brazilian directors, I mean, we love you, and I hope the next government will put the money back into film funding, because we need you. We need you here in Germany for sure. Yeah, so I was just talking about this kind of, maybe a little bit black and white division between linear and circular time, but let's stick to it for simplicity's sake. The notion of technological development and therefore profit and growth is something that all the filmmakers in the short film program that I recommended to you subvert or undermine or play with. So I gave you Women of My Family by Alyssa Larkamp. It Will Be Raining Shoes, a very surrealist animation film by Mariola Brylovska. Park 9000 by Mino Park, and two other short films, one of which is a Super 8 film. And all these films, apart from Alyssa's work, Alyssa Larkamp, all these films deal with technology and how to either deconstruct the notion or the ideology of the technology's progress, or how to make technology more haptic, more tactile, more sensual. And that's because I thought, okay, this is a short film program for a film festival in Brazil. What do you know about Germany? Sure, you know about all the cliches, probably, which is beer consumption and the car export industry. So I settled for, this German technology cliche, and I thought, why not subvert it or play with it. So that's why I chose films by women who look at technology and either sort of DIY it, so do it yourself, make technology yourself, or lead it sort of ad absurdum, to render it absurd. And all of this, of course, plays into bigger philosophical issues around feminism and capitalist values. Alyssa Larkam's film called Women of a Family or Women of My Family, depending on how you read the sentence, is a bit different, but I included it anyway because it's a very personal film and it demonstrates clearly how women play with montage. So again, the filmic level doesn't operate on the cognitive level of understanding a logical narrative. It also dives into the unconscious or into dreamlike or surrealist levels of your consciousness. And Alyssa's doing that so precisely with her montage. And I thought it was a great example to show how film doesn't take you into a surrealist world, but touches the different levels your brain has and allows them to be free through film montage. Yeah, and I hope you like that program.
Yeah, we were very happy with all the recommendations you sent us, and I think the public will enjoy as well. I was thinking maybe you could talk a little bit and tell us how do you go about creating your program, your own program, and how does this go? Can you maybe go and tell us a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, for any one of those of you who want to maybe work at a festival or maybe launch a festival yourself, this is how we work. We happen in April of the year. Highly recommend a festival after the winter break because you don't want to spend the summer inside view films. So for you, that would be autumn.
It's winter for us. It's winter, July, end of July, it's winter.
Yeah. So for you would be an October festival would be ideal. Anyway, we are in April, so I spent the winter inside, makes sense, watching films. We start 6 months in advance to really activate the festival machine. And me as an artistic director, I have a second director, the financial manager director, but I care about the program and I have 8 different sections. There are, of course, you need a competition in every festival. You need a competition where people win a prize. But I also have non-competitive sections for a subject that we chose or a specific genre like documentary film or something about the archive. It's just like trying to make a balanced program that has something for the professionals, but also something for the locals. And then I have 6 curators, and each curator has a very specific specialty, or they've worked in that field for a long time. So either they know a lot about global fiction film, or they know about documentary history, or they have a real knack for experimental short films. Or I've got someone, Jessica Manstetten, who has worked in music videos for ages. So they all have their expertise, and they start viewing the films 6 months in advance. Either they view the submissions, so filmmakers submit to our festival. By the way, that's also an invitation for you to submit your film. And we look at the submissions, or they also do their independent research, which means they go through other festivals or festival catalogs and look at what sounds interesting. And then we get the viewing links, and then we just watch hundreds and hundreds of films. And then the curators select the program. We discuss them, of course, all together. It's quite a collective progress, which has been made very difficult during COVID, but we try to make this as collective as possible. And then a program emerges, which then gets implemented by another team, which is the press and the marketing and the technical team. And I've got different sections. We're around, in the office, we're like 4 people in the year, and we're around 50, 60 people when the festival is taking place. So, you know, it's a lot of change. And that's also one of the challenges for me as an artistic director, is how to keep the communicative, you know, atmosphere, the glue, the intellectual glue between the curators going when they only work for the festival sporadically, so not all year round, you know, because this is an intellectual discursive progress, but if you don't see, feel and touch one another, you know, for a long time, you just lose a kind of the tool for communication and also thinking. But I think that's the problem for every festival. How do you keep people going throughout the year, although they're not hired, they don't work for you 12 months a year? Yeah, that's important. And then the selection is based on 2 things, I would say. Of course, there's first the technical issues. I mean, if a film doesn't have the right sound or the right lighting, or the script is simply also technically not up to standard, the film doesn't get shown. But if, you know, they have interesting and innovative new methods in terms of the image and in terms of the scripts, and of course, you know, there's always that bit of magic that a film can have or not. So that's what we're looking for, you know, that lucky constellation of things. Then the film gets at least into the last round, let's say. But the other question the curators have to ask themselves is this film something for my Dortmund audience or my Cologne audience? I like this film, but how will my audience read it? Will they be able to connect to it? Will they be able to create a relationship with this film? Or is it just too much out there, or too specific, or too whatever, too slow? You know, I think that's also part of feminist curating, is keep in mind your audience. And my audience is not a cosmopolitan audience. You know, this is not London, New York, or Berlin. This is 2 small middle size cities. And the audience is very, very, very mixed. And it's a great challenge, great as in positively great challenge, to find films that everyone can connect to. Sometimes that means that we can't show the more complex and layered films, or we keep them for a special screening. But I enjoy this process very much, to kind of, yeah, include the audience and spectatorship in my artistic choices. Yeah, and then the festival happens, and then you know how it is. It's 6 days of craziness, and then you just collapse.
But I really like this that you have said. I think it's very generous to think this way. I have this impression, this feeling that many times festivals, they are thinking the films for their own, for what they like, what the curators like, and not always thinking or thinking about the public, like, oh no, this is going to be good for the public to kind of, I don't know how to explain that. It's almost like, oh, we know what is good for the public. We know that this is going to be good for them to see the world differently. It's kind of put the curator in a different place, and the way you are talking right now, it's much more close, this relationship. It's much more humble. You know what I mean?
We try, you know, we're not perfect, but we try. I mean, to be more concrete, because I always like to be very concrete. I don't like the abstract, you know, visions. I want to be concrete. So to be very concrete, we made a new section called, my region here is called Nordrhein-Westphalia, NRW, North Rhine-Westphalia. The section is called spot on, as in a light, spot on, North Rhine-Westphalia. And we want to invite local producers who work with women, present one or two of their most important films, and talk with them in terms of, also as an opportunity to network, talk with them about production and how they find their filmmakers, and if they have any advice for young filmmakers. That's a new section we made in order to really invite locals, not just the international directors, but invite the locals. That's one example. So you can create a section that is specifically local. Another great example is a format that we tried out this year. My dear curator, Betty Schiel, invented this format called Films That Heal. And she asked 6 curators from the festival to introduce a film that changed their life, that healed them, which sounds a little bit emotional, or, it sounds a bit personal, but it was amazing. We showed 6 completely different short films. Before each film, I think before each film, the curator had to come on stage and really strip themselves there in front of the audience and say, look, I was going through this crisis in my life and I chose this film because it really picked me up again. Or, I was stuck in my early 20s and I didn't know what to do, and this film showed me the way. Or, I don't know, whatever it was. So within a very compressed short period of time, we were able to hit the nail on its head, to really say what the film meant for this person, politically and personally, and then show the film. And I thought it was amazing. It was like, in this hour, it felt like I had read 6 books about film. It was so intense and fun and personal and all of that. So that's also a nice way to connect to the audience. You're silent.
Yeah, I love this idea. When you told me about it, saying, oh, what a great idea, and how I can imagine the big, huge connection when you have the creator at the screening talking to the audience before telling the story. That's amazing.
Yeah, and you know what? The curator cannot be top down. They cannot be top down because they have to open themselves up personally, and that's a very interesting moment. You know what I mean by top down is what you said earlier, the top down relationship between curator and audience.
Yeah,
that doesn't work with this format.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to be here, the same level, right? Yeah. You were in the audience. It's
yeah, amazing. I remember I went up there and I was a little bit nervous because that film that I showed helped me a lot when I was in a personal crisis. I really wanted to have kids, blah, 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 and that film really helped me. And now I have 2 kids.
Well, talking about life and personal decisions, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you became a film curator and a festival director. I guess everyone is curious to learn about how this path happened.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't straight, female time is not straight. It is secular, as I said. I studied art history in Germany, and then I got a scholarship to the UK. And so I was always an art person, but not a moving image art person. But in the UK, I landed there in 1999, and I stayed until 2013. And when I started out in London as doing an MA in art history, it was the time where film and video installations were really popular in galleries. So the immersive installation because digital technology had just taken place. So people like Douglas Gordon were projecting Hitchcock's Psycho extended to 24 hours. And the Wilson twins made like 4, 5, 6 screen installations into which you walked. And you had this amazing sensual experience. Pippi Lotti Rist, the Swiss artist, was the same generation. So I entered art history at a time when cinema entered art history. And then that kind of got me interested. And I started to shift for my PhD research. I really went into that area. I looked at the history of experimental film between the cinema and the gallery. And then after, so I really found my thing, if you like. And then once I'd finished the PhD, it was just the time when the universities needed researchers like me to teach that stuff to their students, because that was a new, if you like, a new kind of history. And so I taught at different universities in the UK, arts and art theory and experimental film. And then I moved to, and I was very happy, and I curated and I worked with an independent space called Nowhere, which was run by Noor Mirza and Brad Butler in Hackney. And we did all these summer schools and workshops and analog, also 60mm workshops and film screenings. And then I moved to Egypt because I had met my husband in Egypt. That was just after the Arab Spring in 2013. And in Egypt, I taught at the American University. And because the experimental film scene is not so big in Egypt, I also taught cinema, classical cinema history, you know, from silent to sound to new American cinema, that whole thing. And then Egypt got really difficult. I was also curating in Basel, but in Egypt became really difficult, and I was trying to find a job back in Germany. I had 2 kids by then, and I found this job. And I thought, look, I've always been teaching, but isn't festival making a little bit like teaching? Well, you look at a film and then you discuss it. And then, so I applied, and somehow destiny had me right there, because it all worked out beautifully, and we moved here. And only later I found out that running a festival is not like running a seminar, but that's another story.
That's great. It's great to hear the story. Thank you, Maxa. Maybe you can now discuss a little bit. What can you maybe say about film globally, trends, directions? What do you observe? What do you have seen, and what do you think about this near future coming?
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to define trends, because, you know, what I'm saying now is not definite. It's just observations that I made in the last 3 years. Remember, I became a festival director in 2018. My first festival was in 2019, and then COVID came. So I don't really feel like I'm really, you know, sitting back in my saddle yet. I still feel I'm quite new here. But what definitely happens is that the canon of women directors, which was based on, you know, 10, 20 names 15 years ago, is now expanded, and there is a breadth, a global breadth of names that you've never heard of, but they make amazing films, you know, which means that the generation of women filmmakers really grown, has really come into a new self-confidence, and they're doing amazing work. There's not like this leading patch there. It's really widespread now, and there's great force in this new generation of filmmakers. So for a young generation, that doesn't mean a lot, maybe, because this is their normal, but I can see a difference from, you know, the pioneers, a couple of pioneers, to like a widespread industry. We had, you know, 3 women win the world's most important or most influential film festival awards last year. So Cannes, Venice, and Oscars were given to women. Cannes to Juliette Ducournau, and the Oscars to Campion, wasn't it, for The Year of the Dog? And Levin Moore got the prize in Venice. And if you look at the history of these film festivals, it is sometimes 20 years 20 years since they gave a prize to women. And now, last year, 3 female directors received the main prize. So that's quite amazing, but I also asked myself, why is that? Is that just a trend? You know, you have to be careful. And with Julia Ducournau, she made amazing genre films. Grave, I don't know what the translation is in English. Grave was the last one. And then she made Titan, which, yeah, we have to look at how feminist this film really is, you know. Only because women receive the prize doesn't mean that the films are ultra feminist. But that's, I mean, that all needs to go that there's a real new force coming through. The other thing that I observed is that the formats get really long. We had 2-3 hour long documentary films in the recent festival. And I think that might be because people are used to binge watching from Netflix and streaming platforms during the COVID pandemic. We really got used to these long formats. I don't have a problem with that. I love long formats. I love 3 hours long films. It's a bit of a problem when you have to curate a festival because one film eats the time and space in a cinema of 2 films. You know, not to be stingy with programming, but our seats, our slots in cinemas are already limited. So to have too many long films is a bit of a problem. Then in Germany, I really welcome a new, it's like an Iranian German generation that makes amazing films now. They came out last year and the year before, Nico and Future 3, Futur 3. They're both made collectively by Germans and Iranians, Iran having its own very strong film history, but also, of course, Germany having a lot of Iranian refugees from the 75 revolution. And that second generation is now making films. And I think there's some of the most exciting films out there amidst of a lot of very conventional films. The German film industry is very traditional. So this is a real breath of fresh air. Yeah, that's kind of like what I observe. Yeah, I don't know if you want to know more concrete.
Well, maybe you could, just to finish this great talk, you could tell us a bit about your directors, the ones you are following in particular. Would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, there are many, of course, there are many, but what I really, really love is right now, it might change tomorrow, but I really want to know what the Egyptian director Ayten Amin is doing next. She made an amazing film, Suas, that came into our competition last year. And having lived in Egypt, I have a special faiblesse, you know, for the film from the MENA region. So, and I thought this was an amazing masterpiece, Suas. The German, Iranian director, actress, producer, Sarah Fazilat. She's only early 20s, but she's doing really fantastic work. She did played the main role in this Nico film, and she's producing really interesting series also. You know, Michaela Coel, she wrote the I May Destroy You series. She's British. And I was really, wow, it was really new territory for me. So I follow her, not only on Instagram, in general.
That's true.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have a lot of Eastern European directors that I really love, like Milica Tomovic. She had a debut in the competition Celts this year, and I thought it was very subtle work. And Tiona Struga-Mitevska, who won the prize 2 years ago with a film called God is a Woman, Her Name is Petrunia. Really fantastic. So I follow this also, the Tunisian Khouta Ben Hania. She made The Man Who Sold His Skin. I follow these directors. I see what they're up to. Amongst the more established ones, for example, I'm a big fan of Céline Sciamma. She made Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And just very recently, Petite Maman, she's French, queer French director. I'm absolutely baffled. I don't know how, it's real magic. Her films are real magic.
Petite Maman is at our festival, and we had an exclusive interview with her.
Oh, wow.
Talking about the film. We're going to screen before, actually, no, after the movie. We're going to screen her interview. She's amazing.
Oh, you were so lucky, because she's really hard to get hold of. We almost got hold of her camera woman, and then COVID came. But with Celine's work also, I find her career and her upbringing so interesting. You know, she talks about, you know, her love for comics in childhood, and at the same time was trained in classic French literature. But I mean, the whole package is just fascinating. I could listen to her forever. But also Jasmila Spanic is an amazing filmmaker, Serbian filmmaker, who made Quo Vadis Aida, who got international release, was very successful, about the war in Bosnia. And also her, I always need to know, you know, what she's coming up with next, because I think it's really groundbreaking work. So I don't know if you know these names, and I can link them in a box somewhere here if I speak too quickly, but these are really amazing women, filmmakers. You're silenced again.
Yeah. I know some of them. Yeah, I don't know all of them, but yeah, I know some of them. We also admire many of the names that you have mentioned here. Well, Max, I think that's it. It was amazing to hear you. And we can now open for the Q&A for the public, bring their questions. And thank you again. It was really great to hear you.
Thank you. And as I said, you know, we really look forward to more films from Brazil. They've been really, really crucial. I don't say this lightly. Really, the Brazilian submissions we had were very important for us and essential, and shaped the programs and our direction. So thank you very much for inviting me. And yeah, I hope we keep in touch.
Registrado. Gostaria de agradecer ao Sérgio Alisson, que é a coordenação de programação cultural do Instituto Goethe do Rio de Janeiro. Muito obrigada, Sérgio. Obrigada por estar aqui com a gente hoje também. E eu vou convidar agora a doutora Maxa Zoller, diretora do Festival IFFF, que nos permitiu, né, que teve essa generosidade de participar nesse intercâmbio e trazer esses filmes que estão lá na Cardume disponíveis. Então, bem-vinda, bem-vinda, Maxa. A Bruna está aqui com a gente, ela vai fazer a tradução. Quem quiser começar a fazer as perguntas, pode levantar a mão aqui pelo Zoom ou mandar no chat. Sérgio, se você quiser falar um pouquinho, claro, também, bem-vindo.
Falo em português mesmo, falo em que...
Você pode falar em português, que a Bruna vai traduzir para a Maxa.
Ah, ok. Bom, Frau Zoller, eu gostaria de agradecer muito a sua participação. Para a gente foi uma honra tê-la aqui no Cabíria Festival, com essa experiência, e ouvindo aqui o que a senhora falou durante essa aula, eu fiquei me remetendo aqui a outras trajetórias também, semelhantes assim de sucesso.
I'd like to thank your participation here. And while hearing you, I was thinking about other trajectories of success.
E, mais uma vez, em nome do Goethe Instituto, muito obrigado pela sua disponibilidade, pela sua simpatia em estar aqui conosco. E espero...
I'd like to thank you again for your sympathy and for your presence here.
E eu espero, sinceramente, que nós possamos ainda construir pontes futuras.
And I really hope we can build future bridges between us. I'd like to thank you in the name of the Goethe Institute.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I hope we can have more of these amazing projects in the future.
Thank you.
Agradeço a todos vocês e realmente espero que a gente possa ter futuros projetos juntos.
Vamos lá, quem quer começar com a primeira pergunta? Não sejam tímidos. Bom.
It can be comments. It doesn't have to be questions.
Podem ser comentários.
Comments or critique even.
Podem ser comentários ou críticas, não precisa ser necessariamente perguntas.
Tem uma pergunta aqui no chat.
Can you talk a little bit more about the films that heal? Films that heal.
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
Films that heal. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Do you want to know about the films or do you want to know about the format of the screening? Or both?
Você quer saber mais sobre os filmes ou sobre o formato? Ou sobre ambos?
The format of the screen. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we had invited 5 curators from the festival to present their personal highlights of films that made a difference in their life.
Nós convidamos 5 curadoras do festival para falar um pouco sobre filmes que foram um destaque, foram importantes na vida delas.
There was a usual introduction by the curator to this concept, and then the curator invited each other curator to talk a little bit about the film and then show the film, all of which was 60 minutes or 80 minutes. The whole program was 80 minutes.
A curadora fazia uma breve introdução, chamava a outra curadora e todo o formato tinha entre 16 e 18 minutos, isso?
I will give you 3 examples of films so you can get an idea of the richness and the craziness of the screening.
Eu vou te dar 3 exemplos para você entender o quanto era rico e maluco essa exibição.
The first curator was in her 50s, and she is of the generation that was interested in feminist films, but the history of women directors had not been published.
A primeira era uma curadora de volta de 50 anos, ela tinha muito interesse na história do feminismo, mas essa história ainda não tinha sido publicada.
So for her, a film by Alice Guy Blanchet, one of the first directors around 1900, was seeing a film by Alice Guy Blanchet was a healing moment for her, because she realized that there were films made by women, not films about women. There were films made by women. So that was her healing film.
Então, ver um filme feito pela Alice Guy Blanchet, que foi a pioneira do cinema, foi um momento de cura para ela, saber que não existia filmes apenas sobre mulheres, mas filmes feitos por mulheres. Então, isso foi curador para ela.
Another curator showed a music video from the 80s. I forgot the name, but it's a very fun, upbeat, rap, R&B music video that makes you want to stand up and dance. So for her, the healing moment was the sensual, physical impact of a music video on the screen.
A outra mostrou um videoclipe musical dos anos 80, que era com rap, R&B, que tinha aquele ritmo que você quer levantar para dançar. Então, para ela, a questão curadora era um vídeo que traga uma música que faça você querer se levantar e dançar e se movimentar.
And I showed a film by a Finnish artist from 1992, which was experimental, talking about the impossibility of a binary inside outside. It was called On the Threshold of Liberty.
Eu mostrei um filme que era experimental, um filme finlandês de 1992, que falava sobre a impossibilidade binariedade do dentro e do fora.
So now I told you about the format and the films, actually.
Eu falei então sobre o formato e sobre os filmes.
I want to say that we had a very negative Facebook comment on this format by one of the most important film curators in Germany, who said on Facebook, what kind of bull sh *** is this? And it was very satisfying to see that this screening was one of the most successful of the whole festival.
A gente teve um comentário bem negativo no Facebook de um dos maiores críticos de cinema da Alemanha, falando que era uma grande merda, e foi um grande sucesso, uma grande satisfação ver que foi uma dos maiores sucessos de exibição do festival, essa sessão.
Yeah, the comment was by a male curator, of course.
É claro que o comentário era um curador homem.
So did that answer your question?
Isso te responde sua pergunta?
Eu quero convidar todo mundo a abrir as câmeras e falar com a gente, que é mais gostoso ver as carinhas de vocês, escutar a voz de vocês. Pode traduzir, Bruno?
She was asking everyone to open their videos, so it's better to see whom we're talking to. So if you can open your cameras, please.
Patrícia tem uma pergunta, pode fazer, Patrícia.
Oi, vocês me escutam? Então, eu estou pesquisando mulheres na animação brasileira, eu faço mestrado na UFMG, e eu sou do Pará, do norte do Brasil. E aí eu queria saber, e eu queria agradecer pela fala dela e pelo tempo, e é muito inspirador ver uma mulher falar sobre curadoria e festivais, enfim, nesse sentido. E eu queria saber como funciona a participação de filmes de animação no festival e o que ela conhece de animação brasileira.
Patricia, she's taking mastering in the Brazilian faculty university. She's from the state of Pará. She wants to thank you for your time and your participation here. And she's mastering animation, Brazilian animation. And she says that it's very inspiring to hear you talking about creating and your festival. And she wants to know how it works on the participation of animation on your festival. And what you know about Brazilian animations, if you know something about it.
Animation is very important because in animation everything is possible, you know, and when you want to change the world you have to have the imagination that everything is possible. So animation is really important for the feminist filmmaking.
Animação é muito importante porque na animação tudo é possível, e quando você quer mudar o mundo é muito importante todas essas possibilidades. Então a animação é muito importante para um festival e um pensamento feminista.
We work a lot with Tricky Women. Tricky Women is an Austrian animation festival, which is amazing. If she doesn't know, she should check it out. Tricky Women, as in trick film, Tricky Women.
Where are they from?
Austria.
É um festival, elas trabalham muito com um festival austríaco chamado Tricky Women.
I don't know a lot about Brazilian animation, but please, send us your films.
Não conheço muito sobre animação brasileira, então, por favor, nos envie seus filmes.
And what's still, for me personally, what's been a major influence on me was the Brazilian surrealist anthropophage manifesto, the cannibalism manifesto, which also relates to
animism and animation, obviously. So there's a really interesting field in Brazil in relation to animation.
O que me influenciou bastante, que eu acho que tem uma grande relação com a animação, é o Manifesto Antropofágico, algo que me inspirou e tem bastante relação com a animação, acho bastante importante.
Ok, obrigada pela pergunta, Patrícia. Quem mais gostaria? Ó, Beatriz levantou a mão. Beatriz.
Oi, estão me ouvindo bem? Estão me ouvindo? Eu queria fazer uma pergunta. Como conciliar a seleção dos filmes e a audiência? Que é uma pergunta que ela falou um pouco no vídeo que a gente assistiu, mas eu queria saber mais como ela concilia essa seleção e a audiência.
How do you put together the selection of the films and the audience? You have spoken a little bit on the video, but she wants to know a little bit more about it, how to put together the selection and the audience.
Well, that's a big question. Let me just give you an example, because I think examples make abstract thoughts very concrete.
Vai dar um exemplo, porque ela acha que exemplos deixam ideias abstratas mais concretas.
So you have to make this relationship between the film and the audience and the program and the audience. So the program has to have everything for everyone. It has to have the romantic, easygoing, easy access film, and it has to have the structural, subversive, experimental film within one program.
O programa precisa ter tudo. Existe a relação do filme com a audiência e da programação com a audiência. E a programação precisa ter tudo. Precisa ter romance, precisa ter uma coisa estruturada, precisa ter experimental, precisa ter tudo para a audiência.
So it has to be balanced, but balanced from the point of view of the audience, not yourself.
Precisa ser equilibrado, mas equilibrado do ponto de vista do público, não do seu ponto de vista.
Sometimes it's very painful. I have to throw out a film I think is very good and important, but I know it's going to put too much weight on one side of the program.
Às vezes é meio doloroso, porque eu preciso deixar de lado algo que eu acho muito bom, mas às vezes aquilo vai deixar muito pesado um dos pontos da programação e não vai ficar equilibrado.
So even I say the program has to be balanced. It sounds easy, but there's a lot of painful decisions to be made also.
Parece fácil falar em equilibrar a programação, mas pode ser bem doloroso às vezes.
Yes, because you can imagine we also feel the responsibility to expose films of the directors, and sometimes we cannot.
Que tem a responsabilidade, porque às vezes você vai exibir os filmes de uma diretora e às vezes não.
As for the individual film, it's best if there is a thematic bond between the film and what's happening in your city or in your region.
Quanto ao filme, especificamente, é melhor quando existe uma ligação entre o filme e a região e a cidade onde está se dando o festival.
So it's not enough to have a film that does amazing new work on the formal level. Which would maybe work in a big city like Berlin, to work through the form only. Here also I have to work through the content.
Quando se dá numa cidade grande, como Berlim, por exemplo, tudo bem você ir mais pelo formato, mas num festival que se dá numa cidade menor, melhor não priorizar o formato, e sim o conteúdo.
So I don't know, does that answer your question, or you want me to be more precise? Because I could think of an example.
Você quer que seja mais precisa, dê outros exemplos, ou isso já te responde?
Não, isso já me respondeu, obrigada.
It's okay, fine. Thanks.
Nós estamos aqui com a presença de uma das curadoras do festival, Mariana Quinn.
I have one of the festival curators here, Mariana Quinn.
Então, queria aproveitar para agradecer publicamente o trabalho lindo que ela e Lorena Montenegro fizeram.
I like to thank her publicly here, the work that she and Lorena Montenegro have been doing for the festival.
E queria falar para a Maxa que foi muito inspirador ter escutado essa gravação, né, ter feito essa gravação com ela antes do festival começar, e que nos impactou muito, nós aqui da equipe, que ainda estávamos na preparação, e que essa ideia de que a curadoria feminista tem uma conexão maior com o público ressoa muito na gente, e que foi muito importante escutar isso dela.
It was really inspiring and touching to hear you talk all that and to have that talk with you before the festival, while they were making the festival, and that idea that feminist connection with the public. It's important to have a feminist curator that makes a different connection with the public. That was really important. It had a great impact on all of us.
E Mariana, fique muito à vontade para ter uma fala aqui também. Seria muito bom te escutar. Acho que ficaríamos bem felizes de escutar você.
Mariana, feel free to talk, and we'd be very happy to hear you say something.
Obrigada, Marília. É um prazer estar aqui escutando a Maxa, muito inspirador mesmo. Eu acho que eu vou fazer 2 perguntas, mais do que falar assim, sobre todo o processo. Gostaria mais de ouvi-la ainda. Agradeço a Marília e a Vânia de novo pelo convite para a curadoria junto à Lorena Montenegro. Não sei se quer traduzir isso.
Just thanking Marilia for the invitation and for being one of the curators of the festival. And she's saying that it's really inspiring to hear you saying all this, and that she may ask you 2 questions, but she really wants to hear you talk more.
Vou fazer 2 perguntas, então. Uma delas é sobre a perenidade de trabalhar com as mesmas curadoras por edições diferentes do mesmo festival, né? Versus a necessidade, às vezes, ou muitas vezes, de você variar o olhar da curadoria, então trabalhar com diferentes curadoras em diferentes edições. Queria saber a opinião dela sobre isso, porque eu passei um período na Europa há um ano atrás, estudando também, e vi uma tendência assim de curadoria sazonal, digamos assim, né? Os curadores...
Puxa, perdi.
Mutou o microfone.
Trabalharem no máximo durante um período de anos com o mesmo festival, ou uma mudança contínua, ano a ano, com relação ao grupo de curadores. Queria saber a opinião dela sobre isso, o que ela acha, inclusive para manter talvez, criar uma cara, né, para o festival, como pensar isso, assim. E outra coisa que eu queria saber, como ela trabalha...
Deixa a Bruna traduzir, Mari.
Vou fazer essa primeira. She wants to know a little... She wants to know your opinion about the difference of having the same curators for over and over others years of the festival, and versus having this variation between one year and another year. They change curators. She's been studying for 1 year in Europe, and she's seeing a tendency of varying curators from 1 year to another. So she wants to know your opinion about it, and how that makes the festival to have a shape when you keep the same curators or changing, if that makes the festival have a style.
it's a hard question, and so I can only talk for my festival because it's a festival in 2 smaller cities. It's not a cosmopolitan city. My answer to your question would be different if I was still living in London or Berlin. So I can only talk for me here.
Só posso responder sobre o meu festival, como se trata de um festival de 2 cidades pequenas, diferente do que seria se fosse um festival numa grande cidade, numa capital. Então, só posso responder sobre a minha experiência.
So because the festival really was growing out of the grassroots, it also kept half of its curators for a very, very long time. Since some of my curators have been working here since the 90s. So when you have a grassroots festival, it's the nature of the festival to build it up together with one team rather than freestyling, people in and out, because institutionally we're not set up like that.
Como foi um festival de raiz, um festival que nasceu nos anos 90, então ele se manteve com as mesmas curadoras desde então, porque ele não está institucionalizado, ele não está ainda estabelecido. Então é muito comum que se mantenha com as mesmas desde a criação, de uma criação do zero, em vez de fazer uma coisa freestyle e entrar uma, sair outra.
So sometimes I wish I could have taken over this festival like a new director takes over a theater and they choose the actors they want to continue working with, or they bring their own set of actors. Sometimes I wish I could have worked like this, but I couldn't. I had to work with the actors, actresses that were here.
Às vezes eu gostaria de fazer como se fosse uma peça em que você vai e escolhe os novos atores que vão entrar na peça, ou quem vai continuar, quem vai sair, mas infelizmente não pode ser assim, eu tive que continuar com as mesmas atrizes de antes.
So honestly speaking, I work very well with the curators and they know their audience very well, and we've come to be a good team on the one hand. On the other hand, I have to tell you that as an international festival, sometimes I miss the international heavyweight creativity and expertise.
Para ser honesta, a gente se dá muito bem, a gente consegue trabalhar bem juntas e elas conhecem bem o festival e o público, mas como é um festival internacional, eu gostaria muito de ter essa criatividade e esse conhecimento mais contundente, mais robusto de fora, isso faz falta.
So I think the festival has a shape through its long-term commitment to its curators, although sometimes I wish I would have more freedom to change this shape.
O festival tem um formato por esse comprometimento com as curadoras de longa data, mas eu gostaria de ter mais liberdade para poder fazer essa variação e essa adaptação do formato.
So the question you ask me, I cannot just give you an artistic curatorial answer because I also have to think about fair festival work. It's not fair to employ people just for 1 year and then they're out of job again. I also have to think about this from an employee's point of view. How fair is it to constantly change curators? Because the freelancers need sustainable jobs. So now I have a new rule. If ever there is a new curator, she's hired for 3 years, and then we see if we continue or not.
Eu não posso te dar essa resposta só do ponto de vista de curadora, porque o quão justo é você ter uma pessoa freelancer trabalhando e que depois não sabe o que vai fazer, então é preciso ter essa responsabilidade também enquanto empregadora. A gente tem uma nova regra que quando entra uma curadora nova, ela fica por pelo menos 3 anos, e depois a gente vê como vai fazer, se vai continuar ou não.
Yeah, so if you come back to Europe and you see this quick change of curators, it's great to get experience for you as a freelancer. At the same time, you have to fight for the sustainability of being a freelance curator.
Se você voltar para a Europa, é bom pensar nisso, que é interessante ter diferentes experiências, diferentes nomes, mas que também é importante ter uma sustentabilidade enquanto curadora.
Did that answer the question, or do you want me to go deeper?
Isso te responde a sua pergunta ou você quer que ela se aprofunde mais?
Você está muda.
Eu agradeço. Eu caí por um momento, peço desculpas porque minha bateria acabou, mas pelo que eu consegui escutar, agradeço. Ela me respondeu. Eu gostaria de emendar uma segunda pergunta, que é mais rápida também de fazer, que é como que ela pensa e vê a questão da diversidade racial e de classe com relação às histórias contadas, né? Então, a representação vista nos filmes, mas também com relação aos tipos de realizadoras. E uma vez que ela está na Europa, né? Também pensar, saber como o festival pensa a diversidade regional, né, de diferentes países do mundo. Ela mencionou o Brasil, é muito bom saber que há um olhar super interessado no Brasil, mas penso também em outros países do mundo, cineastas africanas, asiáticas também, do Oriente Médio. Ela citou algumas que ela gosta. Queria saber como elas pensam isso no festival, de maneira mais estruturada, talvez, né?
She wants to know, what do you think about the question of diversity, racial and class diversity and representation into the festival, and how does this work regarding the movies itself, the stories, but also the filmmakers that participate in it, and also about the variety of countries. You mentioned Brazil, but also variety and the representativeness of other countries, such as African countries and Middle East and all that?
I think our range of countries is pretty good because, you know, the feminist project connects you quickly with other feminists in other countries, because it's not about the market, it's about your values and your political struggle. And as I said in the talk, we opened up, Asia is not a problem. Africa, we often opened up more to films from the continent, and we did a conscious effort to change our aesthetic expectations for that.
O pensamento feminista, ele ajuda a dar essa expandida, que não tem a ver como marketing, e sim como aproximar as questões políticas e a luta feminista. Então, ele já ajuda nessa conexão. O Ásia não é um problema. A África, o festival abriu mais um olhar e fez um esforço para mudar as expectativas estéticas do próprio festival.
But there's two main problems. One is I'm still struggling to make my curators understand that if you come from a so-called third world countries and you make your film in a conventional style, it doesn't mean that you're mainstream. Or put it another way around, my curators often think that films from the so-called third world need to have the subversive guerrilla style to be authentic. You see, it's a thinking mistake.
Tem dois esforços, dois problemas principais que ela tem que lutar contra. O primeiro é convencer as curadoras dela de que se alguma cineasta de um país chamado de terceiro mundo faz um filme no estilo tradicional, não significa que seja mainstreaming. É que muitas vezes as expectativas dessas curadoras é que se você é do chamado terceiro mundo, você precisa fazer um filme ser autêntico, você precisa fazer um tipo meio guerrilha, para isso valer.
So we had a submission of a film from a Palestinian filmmaker. The film was called Fahra, and it was about a girl that escaped the Nakba. The Nakba is the 1948 when the British and the Israelis invaded Palestinian villages. And this film was made very mainstream style. And it's a taboo subject in Germany. So of course I wanted to show it, but my curator thought it was too conventional. So we didn't show it.
Elas receberam um filme da Palestina que mostra a invasão britânica durante a guerra, a invasão britânica das cidades da Palestina, e que esse assunto é um grande tabu na Alemanha. Então, obviamente, as curadoras não quiseram mostrar, mas ela queria exatamente mostrar pela contundência do assunto, e as curadoras não quiseram, porque disseram que era muito mainstreaming, o formato.
So that's the problem number one, is content versus form. That's problem number one.
Então, esse é o primeiro problema, é conteúdo versus formato.
Number two is that I would critically say myself, we only work for diversity on a symbolic level, not on a real level, because my team is 99% white.
A gente, sendo bem honesta, a gente trabalha com a diversidade num nível simbólico e não real, porque a minha equipe é 99% de pessoas brancas.
So as long as I don't have a mixed team in terms of race, in terms of class, we are okay. But in terms of race, as long as I don't have a mixed team, I will only work symbolically. And Germany is still very behind. So I hope this will change soon.
Então, enquanto eu não tiver uma equipe mista, eu só vou trabalhar simbolicamente. Enquanto em questões de classe, tudo bem, é equilibrado, mas em questões raciais, não. A Alemanha está bem atrás nesse quesito, eu espero que mude logo, mas enquanto não tiver uma equipe mista, vai ser só no nível simbólico.
So we put out calls for curators, and we only get white applications because we don't have black spaces in Germany. Once we have black spaces in the arts, we will start to go into a good dialogue, but we don't. We're very behind. It's very Eurocentric country.
Quando nós abrimos para inscrições para entrar novas curadoras, a gente só recebe inscrições de pessoas brancas, porque não existem espaços negros na Alemanha, espaços de pessoas negras. Enquanto isso não existir, a gente vai continuar tendo uma equipe majoritariamente branca, e a Alemanha é um país bem eurocêntrico.
You understand how I mean this? It's hard.
Difícil.
Obrigada pelas respostas.
Thank you for your answers. Now there's another answer on the chat.
Só antes de você fazer a próxima pergunta, a gente está chegando no fim, então essa vai ser provavelmente a nossa última pergunta. Quem fez a pergunta foi a Patrícia. Patrícia, você não quer falar para a gente?
We're heading to the end of the conversation, so probably this will be the last question. Quer que eu leia, Patrícia? So you mentioned on the video that the history is not straight, because life itself is not straight. It's also something that you learn. It's in a spiral. So how do you see the demands, the reivindications, the manifest of women on the cinema throughout different years? And how do you take the feminist curatorship to festivals that have already a structure, that are already institutionalized? How do you take this feminist thinking? Or how do you ou espalhar em pequenos lucros por mais regiões em or would it be a better solution to spread among small groups in different regions, new festivals? That would be better, a better option.
Better than what?
Or to take the feminist thinking into a big festival that are already settled, or to spread among small groups in new festivals?
Both. Let me think. So the spiral thing and the festivals. Well, first of all, I think it's a great advantage to really understand, as a woman, to understand that time is cyclical, because it makes you much more aware and wise and less surprised when something new comes up, because you are able to weld it or to enmesh it immediately into what's already been done. So it's, first of all, it's an advantage to think like that.
É uma grande vantagem a gente pensar que realmente o tempo feminino é cíclico, que isso nos ajuda a nos moldar as coisas para a gente não ficar surpresa quando algo acontece. A gente já está preparada.
At the same time, you also need to reinvent the wheel with every generation.
Ao mesmo tempo, a cada nova geração, você precisa reinventar a roda.
So the new feminist film festivals that I see coming up, sometimes I find them a bit superficial, just because, you know, their makers are very, very young.
Então, os novos festivais que eu vejo surgindo, às vezes eu acho eles muito superficiais, porque eles fazem a gente parecer muito, muito jovens, enquanto movimento feminista.
I think for the big festivals, so we're talking the big ones, Cannes and Berlinale, I don't have much hope that they will really understand what it takes to be 50-50, what it takes to be really equal. I don't have much hope.
Não tenho muita esperança em relação aos grandes festivais como Cannes ou Berlinale. Eu não tenho grandes esperanças de que eles vão entender o que é preciso para que realmente as coisas sejam 50%, para que seja igualitário.
So I put my hope into the festivals that are made by very young curators, even if I sometimes find them a little bit obvious. It's obvious what they're showing. It's not layered, but I put my hope in them anyway. And I put my hope into a kind of decentralized, strong, generational, pressure building film world, if you like. So it's decentralized, it's young, and it creates pressure on the big festivals.
Então, a minha esperança está nesses novos festivais, com curadoria mais jovem, embora eu ache mais óbvios. Minha esperança está ali, e na descentralização. Eles são descentralizados, são jovens, e eles pressionam os festivais maiores.
So actually, it's a good way of ending with your questions, because only if you in Brazil make a lot of small and mid-sized feminist festivals, and we work together across the globe, that's when we can build real pressure on the big festivals.
Então, é uma ótima forma de terminar aqui a rodada de perguntas, porque se vocês brasileiras fizerem pequenos e médios festivais, juntos a gente vai conseguir colocar uma grande pressão sobre os festivais grandes.
Aurelia put a heart.
Coraçãozinho.
Que lindo. Muito obrigada, Maxa. Foi super poderoso te escutar e tenho certeza que essas falas aqui vão ressoar muito em muita gente. Muito obrigada e muito obrigada ao público que estava aqui presente hoje.
Yes, please feel free to email me with questions. Also those here, you can just email the info@email and they forward it to me. And thank you again, also the Goethe, and thank you for the interpreter. What was your name? Bruna?
Bruna.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, and I hope we'll be in this fight together for much longer.
Agradece a participação de todos e fala que todo mundo está aberta para receber e-mails de todo mundo. Podem escrever para ela que ela está disponível. E agradece ao Instituto Goethe.
Sim, muito obrigada ao Goethe, ao SP Cine e a todos os nossos parceiros e apoiadores e ao público. Continue acompanhando o Cabíria, que vai até dia 3 no online, com programação lá na Cardume. Inclusive os curtas que a Maxa mencionou aqui estão lá disponíveis para vocês assistirem até dia 3, até quarta-feira.
So everybody's invited to keep following Cabíria Festival to the 3rd of August. And the films presented by Maxa will be available, the short movies will be available to watch on the platform Cardume.
Obrigada. Bom dia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Tchau.
Bye.